If you'd like to earn CPE credit for listening to this episode, visit EarmarkCPE.com. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Continuing education has never been so easy. And now, on to the episode.
This is Oh My Fraud, a true crime podcast where if our story includes a prostitute, that prostitute's gonna live.
We haven't lost a sex worker yet.
I'm Greg Kyte.
And I'm Caleb Newquist.
So, Caleb, I wanted to start today's episode by reading a very nice review that we got on Apple Podcasts, if I may.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So check this out. The username was Yomang256, and Yomang256 says, "Great podcast with great explanations and great selection of frauds, all with a sarcastic sense of humor that I can jibe with. I like that they focus on some of the lesser-known frauds. The stories are well told and have a great take on the accounting principles involved. Keep them coming, and thanks for the content."
Well, that's nice and cool. Thanks, Yomang256. We love it when people love us. Love us? No.
Love us and leave us a review.
Love us and leave a review on Apple or Spotify or America Online. You know, wherever you can leave reviews on podcasts. We love it when y'all do that. And you know, if you leave a review like that, then maybe Greg will read it on a future episode, and that's got to be worth something.
I'd hope it'd be worth something to somebody. My mom's going to start leaving reviews just because she...
Oh.
Yeah, because that's...
Thanks, Greg's mom.
Maybe her username is Yomang256. I don't know. I don't keep up with that kind of stuff. But anyways, enough with the shameless self-promotion. Let's get into today's case. And to do that, I was wondering, Caleb, what foreign countries have you visited? And Canada doesn't count.
Wait, why doesn't Canada count?
Because it's just... it's basically North Dakota.
Oh, I mean, but you get a stamp in your passport.
True, you do, but
you don't get one when you go to North Dakota.
No, but no one cares about your stamp for Canada. That's why.
Right, fine.
You're not going to be at the party and pull out your passport and say, "Hey guys, check this out, Canada."
Entry point, Vancouver. Okay, fair. All right. Yes, Canada, Mexico. I had to write them down. Mexico, Jamaica, Cayman Islands, Nicaragua, Scotland, England, Iceland, Ireland, Italy, France, Spain, and the Netherlands. And I might be missing one, but like that's so basically, you know, North America and Europe. That's what I got.
Yeah, that's a pretty exotic list. For me,
I don't know if exotic is the word I would use, but anyway, I do want to know where you've been, Greg.
It is to me. So besides Canada, I've been to Mexico, I've been to Colombia, South America, and I've been to the Philippines. That's it. The U.S. and four foreign countries, and that's even if you do include Canada.
You know what though? You got 3 continents.
Good point. You've got
3 continents. 2. I mean,
okay.
It depends on how you classify Central America.
That's what I was just going to say. Yeah, but yeah, I think according to the Risk Board, Central America is part of North America. So probably I think you're right.
But as has been established, if I just may raise one important point, I think we've pretty well established that our geography is for shit on the show. So
yeah,
if there's an error in there,
yes,
it's you know I'm sure there's an error of some kind.
Yeah, and my geography is based mostly on the game Risk. So if I cite Kamchatka or Siam, that's the reason why. But when you were in your foreign countries that you were in, were you aware while you were there? Were you aware of any bribery that transpired on your trip, either in your party or adjacent to your party? And were you ever offered any drugs or prostitutes?
Bribery, not that I can recall. You know, tipping, like especially like in, you know, it just depends on the culture, right? Like tipping is, you know, helpful. So whether that's a bribe or not is a matter of context, I suppose. But not like hardcore bribery where I'm like, if I give you $100, will I stay out of jail? Like nothing like that.
Right.
And as far as the other questions, I have been offered drugs in many places, both domestic and abroad. And I've sought drugs in many places, both domestic and abroad. And I've been propositioned a few times, both domestic and abroad. So, but actually, it comes to mind, at least abroad, the sex workers on La Rambla in Barcelona were especially persistent, as I recall. But then, you go to the Netherlands where you don't have to seek out drugs or sex. They're just kind of around, like everywhere.
Right.
I mean, and maybe everywhere is a bit of a stretch, but it's, stuff's easy to find.
Gotcha. You again, you seem like you've lived a much more exotic life than me. I'm one of those people who the DARE program primed me for a lot more drugs to be offered to me than have ever been offered to me. And I can't say I've ever been solicited by a prostitute ever. But then again, I'm also very clueless too. So maybe it happened and somebody was like, do you like to party? And I'm like, totally. Okay. See ya. Have fun at your party.
Yeah.
That's
That's
not beyond the realm of possibility that happened more than once. But here's what's happened to me while I've traveled abroad. In my most recent trip to Mexico, and mind you, I was proudly wearing a Schoolhouse Rock t-shirt. I was offered heroin, which I thought was like like somehow clue in to who you're talking to, because again, probably the dude rocking the Schoolhouse Rock t-shirt, probably not really shooting up in the back alleyways. In terms of bribery, I do have an interesting story about that. Way back when I was in high school, I went on one of those church service project mission trips where we all get in the church bus and drive across the country to border towns in Mexico, and we build a house for a person who we don't know how they were selected, but they were, and they got a house that for most of us middle-class kids in the United States was just a really nice shed. So the first one of those, I went on several of those. It was weird. The very first one I went on, the guy who led the trip told us that he had to bribe the border patrol, the Mexican border patrol, to get us into Mexico. And so, he bribed the Mexican border patrol for Jesus. And I respected that. Yeah.
Yeah. Bribing for the Lord.
I'm all about it. And then more recently, just this last December, I went to the Philippines, and I was not once, but twice asked, by in two very different, circumstances, if I was interested in prostitutes, which was a little disconcerting.
Oh, I mean, are you interested in prostitutes?
No, for the third, including both those people in the Philippines, for the third time, including you. No, I'm not. Listen. Here's what this was an honest interaction. Okay, I was riding on the back of a scooter, and this guy was taking me to the shopping district in this town that I was in the Philippines.
Okay.
So already it was it felt like a compromising situation. So I give him that. So I'm on the back of a stranger's scooter. He's driving me to the shopping center, and he's like, "So hey, where's your wife?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm not. I'm not married, but I didn't get into that. But I was like, I was like, well, I gotta go. I didn't get into all my details. I was like, she couldn't come." And he's like, "Oh, do you want me to take you to some girls?" And I was like, "No, I don't." And then he said, "Boys?" And I was like, "No, I'm
naturally
literally. This is literally what I said. I said, "No, I am very happy in the relationship that I am in right now." I said those words to this man riding his scooter with me. And I was very out of place, especially riding on the back of a scooter. And my assumption, though, is that there's enough douchebag Americans that go to the Philippines, that, sex tourism kind of stuff, which just does not sit well with me at all. Yep. But it must happen enough to where people are assuming that if you're a single middle-aged man in the Philippines, are going, "I know what this guy's here for. Let's give him what he wants."
Yeah, right.
So,
hey.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that story. I enjoyed that story very much. Not sure it'll make the cut, but I enjoyed that story.
Well, it better make the cut because bribes and prostitutes are integral to our story today, because bribes and prostitutes were used to corrupt pretty much the entire United States Navy. I mean, not technically the entire, I mean, it wasn't the entire Navy, but when we get into the story, it's definitely going to feel like it was the entire Navy.
All right. Our story centers on Leonard Glenn Francis, who grew up on the island of Penang. Am I saying that right?
Yeah,
Penang.
that's correct.
Penang in Malaysia. Leonard's a big guy. People figured he weighed somewhere between 350 and 400 pounds. And I know this is America, and I'm no judgment, but that's on the big side. So
yeah,
no offense to anyone.
That's even on the big side for Texas. So yeah.
Yeah, right. So hence Fat Leonard. All right. So Fat Leonard is our man. Okay. The family business.
That's what he was known as. People,
that's right.
Everybody called him that.
Everybody called him Fat Leonard. And he worked in the family business. And that family business was supplying merchant ships with food and fuel. We're gonna run through a few things here real quick. So first, his mom left his dad, and his dad was a lazy kind of jerk. Piece of shit, really. Not a good guy.
He was not kind of. This guy was a total piece of shit.
Yeah. Total scuzzball. Okay. And so Leonard,
he was abusive. He was abusive. He was philandering, and didn't even care. Like he would bring girlfriends to the family home while mom and kids were around.
Yeah. Okay. So whatever label you had for that guy, take it up a couple extra notches.
Yeah. Whatever that label was, replace it with lazy drunk piece of shit.
Yeah. There you go. So Leonard, as a teen, ended up being kind of the de facto head of this family business, again, because his dad is a lazy drunk piece of shit. And part of running this type of business in Malaysia in the 1980s included paying bribes to local officials. And if I understand it correctly, that's just kind of how business gets done. It isn't like corruption, right? Is kind of the fabric of commerce in a way. Right? Is that fair to say?
It is. I think that's fair to say. And I think that there's two things at play there, because I do believe in emerging economies, you're going to find more bribes being required in that setting. But also, I don't know what it is about like ports, but for some reason, ports is like mafia.
Yeah.
That's that breeds mafia and mafia type interactions.
And
so it's I was thinking it was a combination of both of those things.
Yeah. So part of the other stuff that young Fat Leonard was doing was he'd buddy up with, sailors that would come through the ports who liked, booze and some action, some ladies. And so he made those connections. And then somewhere along the line, he also started associating with some sordid characters who were part of the Chinese gang called the Triads.
And that's made a turn in Leonard's life, because when Fat Leonard was 21, he was recruited by some of the Triads to be a getaway driver for an armed robbery that they had planned. So he wasn't wielding a gun. He was sitting behind the wheel of the car, and they pulled off this armed robbery. They stole a lot of money, and they got away with it. And Leonard's cut. They stole this money from Leonard in an account I heard of him speaking himself. They stole from what he described as money changers. So the Triads kept all the local currency, and Leonard's cut was all the foreign currency. And they also gave him all the guns, which was an interesting part. When I first heard that, I was that's weird that his cut was the guns that the other people used in the armed robbery. But what it turned out happening was that not long after the heist, Leonard was apprehended by the police. They went to his house. They found the guns. They found the money. And Leonard went to prison. And here's the crazy fact. Gun possession in Malaysia at that time was a capital offense. It was, Caleb, it was just having a gun was punishable by hanging in Malaysia. So Leonard didn't just get busted. Leonard was on all of a sudden, 21-year-old Fat Leonard on death row.
Man.
And obviously he's distraught, doesn't know what the hell he's going to do. He's turning to every deity that he knows of. Like literally, he talks about this where he's like, he's covering his bases with his prayers. And his mom comes and somehow, and it's a little unclear how she was able to make this happen. And maybe this is just because I'm sort of superimposing like an understanding of like the United States judicial system on this. But his mom was able to plead on his behalf before the authorities for his life. And she actually, through tears and through, saying he's a good boy and he was just hanging out with bad people, she convinced the authorities to release Fat Leonard, and he escaped the cold clutches of death.
After getting out of jail, it was back to work for Fat Leonard. It's worth noting at this point that Fat Leonard was this big, did we mention big? Yeah, we mentioned big. Yeah, okay.
Fat Leonard's a big guy?
He's a big guy, yeah. But he's also a gregarious guy, so likable, right? Fun to be around. Yeah. And he's kind of got this ambiguous racial look to him. Scottish, Sri Lankan, Portuguese. That, But then he speaks perfect English, okay? American English, and no detectable accent, right? And so using his parents' connections, he kind of, weaseled his way into this 4th of July party at a U.S. embassy. And he started schmoozing with some U.S. dignitaries. He built relationships and began acting like their personal concierge. And he hooked important people up with meals at the best restaurants, and he scheduled appointments with like very sought after tailors for some sick threads, right?
Right.
Okay.
Again, that's a weird thing. That's part of the account, is that there were dignitaries in the U.S. in these foreign countries, and it's like, I gotta get this tailor. Where's this one tailor? And he's like, I can get you with that tailor. And like, you're the best, Fat Leonard. Right.
And it is a bigger deal than kind of it sounds like, because you're talking. He's dealing with Americans who have no language skills for this part of the world, right? And so he's providing a service, and he's making it very easy. And so the schmoozing really pays off. And then he secures a contract with the U.S. Navy, supplying smaller ships with fuel and other stuff that they need. And that brings forth the Glenn Defense Marine Asia Company. That was his company.
Right. Which it seemed like a very easy step from supplying. He was supplying merchant ships with his family business, and he just pivoted to some lucrative, and everybody knows that if you get a government contract, you struck gold. So he just pivoted from what he knew to the next thing that was a better thing through giving these people some, through greasing some wheels with these people, right?
Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting at this point to note, none of the stuff he did, none of the stuff that's accounted for in the research that I did up to this point would be considered bribery. If you gave somebody, and it didn't say if he just like got people like into these meals. The way I read it was that he actually paid for some very nice meals at the best restaurants for these people. But then also just scheduling appointment for like helping people get in with a tailor. None of that stuff's like bribery. That's all just it's schmoozing. It's schmoozing and gift giving.
I think that's called a favor.
Right. Exactly. And it's also called having hustle. A lot of it's just this dude had a lot of hustle.
Yeah, right on.
So at this point, since he got this Navy contract, we do need to give a little bit more context for what the Navy is all about. Do you have any like military family or friends, close friends, Caleb?
Not like National Guard stuff, but no one that I can recall that served like overseas or anything like that. At least an uncle or two that served in the National Guard, and a cousin or two that like did ROTC and National Guard, stuff like that.
Yeah, my
No
girlfriend's
sailors.
father served actually both in the Army and in the Marines. But personally, I had a buddy who went into the Navy, who was the best man at my wedding for my failed marriage. So that's, but that was before he was in the Navy. So
Yeah.
everything's very tangential for me. But so I didn't know a lot of this stuff. Maybe people who are more familiar with, especially with the Navy, know this stuff. But here's kind of a primer on the Navy, and that is, and I thought this was so interesting. The Navy is amazing at doing what the Navy does when they're at sea. They have a weakness, and that weakness is when they have to land at a non-U.S. military port overseas. Because in those cases, they just have to dock. They need some supplies, and they plan this stuff out. But they'll have to go there. But again, if it's not a U.S. military base or a U.S. military port, or even some sort of U.S. port that they're overseas that they're docking at, they're at the mercy of contractors that they find to help them get the stuff they need. People like Fat Leonard. And they need everything. We already talked food and fuel, but some other things that I was unaware of. The Navy vessel gets into this port. Apparently they don't even have their own dinghies to get them from the ship to the shore. So part of what these contractors do is they supply people. There's stories about how the locals would hire turtle fishermen in the turtle fishermen's boats, and the turtle fishermen would just shuttle the guys back and forth from shore to the boat. And
otherwise they'd have to
interesting
swim.
Thing, right?
Right?
And one thing about Navy guys, can't swim.
Yeah, afraid of the water.
Horrible at swimming.
Terrified.
Yeah.
Terrified.
Yeah. But the other thing, and this was something it makes perfect sense once it was pointed out, but these ships, when you're out at sea, there's no fresh water. So these ships have these gigantic tanks just to hold fresh water. And when they get into port, they just need someone to supply them with fresh water. So they have all the needs to keep a bunch of humans alive while they're out in the middle of the ocean for a long, long time. Fat Leonard and people like Fat Leonard were the people that they need. So then add that to the fact that in 1991, the Philippines, the country where I've been to, kicked the U.S. out of their naval base at Subic Bay. And so the Navy needed some other similar port in that same geographic region. So Leonard, already having some connections and some success with the Navy, he decided he was going to open up a port in Bali, Indonesia, specifically to serve U.S. Navy vessels who were being displaced out of the Philippines. So again, dude's got hustle. And as I mentioned earlier, part of Fat Leonard doing Fat Leonard's job in Southeast Asia included greasing palms and greasing wheels with bribes and gifts and services, like we said. But what started happening is Fat Leonard increasingly started applying those same necessary tactics in that part of the world, these marketing techniques, if you will. He started applying those to the Navy. So he started giving money, just cash, to sailors and officers in the Navy. He started giving them Michelin star meals, high-end hotel rooms, high-end booze, Cuban cigars, and most notably and most scandalously, prostitutes. And he gave that to anybody in the Navy that he offered those to anybody in the Navy that he thought was a decision maker or an influencer, like someone who had the power to direct, who could say, we do need to dock somewhere over there in Southeast Asia. I know a guy. Let's head over to that guy, that swell guy, Fat Leonard, who's over there in Bali and in Malaysia. And so that's what he started doing. And another fun fact, didn't know this before, but again, makes perfect sense. Sailors in the U.S. Navy can be punished for accepting any gifts of value larger than $20. So if he gave $21 of cash, that's obviously more value than $20.
So So if I'm in New York City and I'm walking around and it happens to be Fleet Week and I see a sailor cruising the city and I just give him a Starbucks gift card for $25 and then he does me a favor.
I believe that's a court-martial.
Yeah. And then
he doesn't even need to do you a favor.
Or maybe it's a woman, but she gets in trouble.
Yeah. And no favor is required in terms of reciprocation. They just can't receive the gift. It's like this. So before even becoming an accountant was on my radar, I had a really good friend in college who she became a CPA. She started working for Ernst & Young out in Seattle. And one of her clients, one of her audit clients was REI. Do you know the retailer, the outdoor retailer REI?
I do.
So my friend was working an audit for REI, and I said, I bet you they give you some sweet swag while you're working this audit at REI. And she was offended at that question. And because again, I wasn't an accountant at this point. Like I said, it wasn't even on my radar. And she was like, heavens no, I couldn't take anything from an audit client because that would impair my independence. And you think about that because again, it does make sense when you step back and you think about it. The Navy has got to be very concerned about their sailors and their officers being corrupted by foreign by anybody. And again, we even right. And we talk about, like, in the accounting profession, we talk about independence and in what is it? In reality and in truth and appearance, whatever. What is that phrase?
Fact and appearance.
That's it. Fact and appearance. I teach ethics, and I couldn't dig that phrase out. But the same thing seems like it would apply to the Navy, where they'd be like, our officers need to not be double agents in fact and appearance. So they're like, you can't receive anything over $25. Now, you also bring up a good point. How well is that enforced? Probably not. So
I don't know.
Because again, if Leonard's handing out Cuban cigars, I'm going to guess every single one of those Cuban cigars is worth more than $20. And if I was somebody in the Navy, I'd just take this Cuban cigar and go, thanks, buddy, and smoke it. And I don't think I'd worry too much about getting court-martialed for it. So, but to continue with our story, not only was Fat Leonard, like in terms of the legitimate work that Fat Leonard did, not only was he a supplier to the Navy, he was also a fixer for the Navy. He did a lot of dirty work, like things that were expected by foreign countries, like in the context, in the business environment of these foreign countries. And it's stuff that the U.S. Navy couldn't or didn't want to do. Like I said, it's dirty work, a lot of bribes. And using Leonard to do that stuff was a way of getting this necessary, albeit dirty work done without the Navy having to feel like it was doing the dirty work. Because they just say, hey, get this stuff done. Here's a bunch of money. And they were like, we don't need to know how you get it done. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, walking around money. It's like you need some walking around money to do some of these things, I'm sure. So here's some walking around money.
Yeah. It's like just bill us, and we don't need to see the line items for your budgets that include, how much money was used for shakedowns and intimidation and how much was used for bribery. Just get it done. Get the job done. You're an independent contractor.
So Fat Leonard is like Ray Donovan, essentially.
Okay.
Do you know that show? Do you know that show
that I haven't watched, but I think I know Ray Donovan kicks some ass.
Yeah, he's a fixer. Hollywood fixer. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a show about a Hollywood fixer.
Yeah. Okay. So he was
dirty work. Dirty work.
And here's the thing. Leonard's dirty work didn't just include shaking people down and giving bribes. Leonard's fixing also included getting sailors out of trouble when they got in trouble in these foreign ports. Everything from getting sailors out of trouble for getting in fights to getting sailors out of trouble when those sailors committed sexual assault. So this is where it starts getting a little bit gross and a little bit uncomfortable. He would pay off both officials who tried to try to hold these wayward sailors to account, and he would even pay off victims just to say, here's some money, so how about this never happened? And he did that all in an effort to keep the Navy's operational tempo humming along while they were at these foreign ports. And all of this stuff that Leonard did, it's clear that he was really, really good. He was very effective at what he did. There was never a time where it was like he wasn't giving them like top-notch service. And because of that, the Navy, he made the Navy's shitty and stressful stops at foreign ports hassle-free for these naval officers.
On October 12, 2000, the USS Cole was refueling in Yemen, and a small fiberglass boat carrying 2 men and over 400 pounds of plastic explosives approached the Cole and exploded. That's what explosives do. This suicide attack killed 2 men in the boat and 17 U.S. sailors and injured 37 more, and thus began rampant defense spending to protect U.S. troops, which was supercharged less than a year later when the September 11th terrorist attacks occurred.
And as a direct result of the attack on the Cole, the Navy wanted and needed and demanded increased protection for its boats in these foreign ports, because that's exactly the context in which the USS Cole was attacked.
May I ask you something about that? Because I have to imagine,
Please.
like, the boats were probably just sitting out there, right? It's like, oh, there's a big boat. There's a big boat out there. And if anybody wanted to, obviously, given what happened to the Cole, anybody could just cruise on up and they're just sitting out there, just bobbing along. So, okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And
which is weird.
I mean, the USS Cole, yeah. It is.
I mean,
weird.
20 years on,
and
more than 20 years on, it seems weird. It's like, oh yeah, I would think it would be guarded quite heavily.
Yeah, you do, but then you also wonder how that would happen, because I would think, like, let's say you're in this crowded port, there's going to be other boats going around you.
Sure.
I mean, again, this is from a guy who doesn't know so much what he's talking about, but I would assume that you're not gonna be the only boat in that port. There's gonna be other people going around with you. You're the U.S. Navy, and if somebody just gets a little too close to you, do you blow them out of the water and just say, "We told you to stop coming closer to us"? Because that's gonna be a PR nightmare.
For maybe a slight overreaction by the U.S. Navy in that case.
It does, but it wouldn't have in this case,
right?
Knowing that there was 400 plus pounds of plastic explosive and a terrorist and a suicide attack that was coming your way. So in hindsight, so it's definitely a dilemma. It's clearly a problem and a dilemma that the U.S. Navy had, in my mind.
But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for Fat Leonard, is it not?
Absolutely, because he was a fixer. He was a yes man. He was going to try to help the Navy do whatever he could, as long as they were paying their invoices to him. So in this case, Leonard got creative, and he included in his menu of offerings to the United States Navy a thing that he called the Ring of Steel, which started out as I mean, imagine this. It's a bunch of 50-gallon drums, empty and sealed 50-gallon drums, so these things could float.
Mm-hmm.
They were attached with cables, and they would encircle anchored ships. So it was like, it was, I mean, I don't know if they sell 50-gallon drums at Home Depot, but I envision this as a real, like, Home Depot junkyard, garage skunkworks DIY kind of job that he did. But the Navy liked it.
Scrappy Fat Leonard.
Very, yeah. Well, and again, just as a businessman, this guy, he's being innovative. He's like, here's a problem. I can think of a way that we can protect these ships. Let's do this. He did it. It worked. It was the first iteration. The Ring of Steel that, like I said, started as 50-gallon drums. It evolved to become anchored barges that were attached by very heavy gauge cables. And so that you kind of open this up, a U.S. Navy ship would anchor inside of the Ring of Steel. And Leonard would have mercenaries on boats that would be patrolling both inside and outside the Ring of Steel. And he even would have scuba divers diving underneath to make sure, to ensure the safety of these ships. Mm-hmm. And so again, Leonard kicked ass at what he did. He was great at what he did. And he started gathering all these things that the Navy calls Bravo Zulus, which is just, it's basically a naval letter of excellence, kind of like, hey, this if you're a Navy contractor and you've got Bravo Zulus, that's kind of like a Michelin star, I guess, but given by the Navy and for not food,
or maybe a merit badge.
Okay, maybe a merit badge would be better. But again, it definitely validates and legitimizes Leonard's business big time.
So Leonard started raking in more money and opening up in more ports, including Singapore, Hong Kong, and others. And since Fat Leonard, I just kind of like saying that, don't you? Fat Leonard.
It's nice.
It's cool.
It lands.
Yeah, it lands really nice. Fat Leonard was providing excellent service, as we've mentioned, as well as money, gifts, sex. And to decision makers in the Navy were more willing to direct ships to Leonard's ports. And so Leonard also began submitting, because this is going so well, I guess, Leonard starts submitting inflated invoices, which his friends in the Navy approved without any problem whatsoever. Okay.
Right. And let me give a little bit of nuance there too.
Yeah.
It's not that from what, again, this was some of the stuff that I really dug into. It's not that like every invoice was just automatically rubber stamp approved. What would happen, like he'd bill like sometimes 3 times the amount that he should have for something. And he was very much, if somebody's like, hey, this is too high, he'd be like, cool, what should it be? And they'd be like, maybe 1/3 of that. And he'd be like, okay. And then that was his MO. So it was very much get out of jail free if there was any, if and when on the rare occasions that there was scrutiny, he'd just back off and lower his bill. And they'd be like, cool, no harm, no foul, keep going.
And Leonard, he threw these naval appreciation parties, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
He was renowned for them.
Okay. And they started getting more lavish. And according, well, I'm reading the word that Greg wrote here, which is skanky. Lavish and skanky.
And I think that's a good, I'm gonna say that word lands, and I think that's a great description of these these appreciation parties.
According to Leonard, at least one such party kind of just ended up being a full-blown orgy. So that's something interesting. And
so there's that.
Not only that, but Leonard claims that he also had video cameras secretly installed in karaoke machines, which I don't know how you would do that, but that seems weird. And so
seems innovative. This guy was an innovator.
And a little bit of extortion-y, right? So he's got he's got compromising.
You think?
He's got compromising information on some pretty powerful people in the Navy, and he's got video. He's got the goods. He's got the goods on these people in the Navy.
Absolutely. Then things start to turn for Leonard. One day, a lieutenant, a new guy on the scene, noticed that Leonard was charging them for too much fresh water. And Caleb, you may ask, how did this guy know that Leonard was charging them too much for fresh water? Great question. It's because the invoice was for more water than the boat could physically hold. Like, this guy knew how, like, the size of the fresh water tanks on these boats. And he's like, yeah, this invoice is wrong because there's not enough room for this much water. And so he pushed back. He even confronted Leonard about it, and that did not go well because he's like a junior officer, and Leonard was like real butthurt that a junior officer would have the gall to confront him about this kind of thing. When it's like, again, to accountants like us, we go, yeah, that's not a gray area. This is wrong. It's 100% wrong. Fix that. So Leonard got butthurt, and then this guy's superiors even told him, they were just like, hey, shut up, knock it off, get back to your desk, don't worry about it. So, which, Caleb, that's bonkers. Yes. Because it's math. It's just math, and his seniors didn't have his back on that because arguably they were in Fat Leonard's back pocket.
Right.
And so after another inflated invoice for sewage removal, this guy just had enough, and he went to the NCIS, which is the Navy Crimes Investigation Service, Naval Crimes Investigation Service. And so NCIS then contacted the commanding officer to follow up on this, and the commanding officer was just like, yeah, don't worry, no, it's fine, nothing's happening here, no big deal. And so the NCIS just dropped it, and then the lieutenant also after that informed the NCIS about Fat Leonard's criminal past, his death sentence for gun possession in Malaysia. And here's another fun fact I didn't know, and that is that anyone with a criminal record is precluded from being awarded a Department of Defense contract. So ergo, Fat Leonard just shouldn't have ever gotten any Department of Defense contracts, period, let alone be in a place where he shouldn't be, he doesn't even have the right to give an invoice, let alone give a false or inflated invoice. And then here's what's totally bonkers to me, Caleb. One of the many things in this case is totally...
Wait, it gets more bonkers?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah. Because then Fat Leonard, Fat Leonard was able to use his network of cronies within the Navy to get that lieutenant's position removed. So this guy was a pain in his ass, and he's just like, yeah, you don't work here anymore. That's the kind of power that Fat Leonard had amassed as a fucking contractor to the U.S. Navy. Amazing. But again, he's bribing people, and we're going to get to it. That fosters a very strange relationship. So not only this lieutenant was narking out Fat Leonard, but also at this time, other people, like larger numbers of people started narking out Fat Leonard. The theory is that by this point, we were into the Obama administration days, the threat of the hysteria of the terrorist attacks, and particularly of 9/11, was starting to reduce, and therefore the military spending was also starting to be reduced. So it wasn't the gravy train that the armed forces were on that was born out of 9/11. So that's kind of the theory of why people were starting to analyze his bills and starting to talk about it a little more. But here's what happened. Not only this lieutenant, but there was a total, I'm sure including him, of 27 different Fat Leonard investigations that were initiated by the NCS, and all of those 27 investigations were dropped. And you got to think, again, it's the same kind of thing that happened with this lieutenant, where the NCIS started looking into it, and people in authority were like, yeah, nothing to see here. Everything's in perfect order. So at that point, 27 initiated and dropped investigations, and then comes along this person named Teresa Kelly. She was a civilian naval employee, and her job in the Navy, for the Navy, was to negotiate contracts with companies like Fat Leonard's company. That was her job. And it was obvious to her that Leonard's invoices were inflated, And on top of that, she was not interested in Fat Leonard's money, and she was not interested in Fat Lenny's prostitutes. So she wasn't getting in his back pocket, and she basically she had some scruples. So she sent, and again, this is so telling of the kind of power that Leonard had. She noticed these shenanigans going on by Fat Leonard and with his invoices. She sent an email to a colleague about her concerns and suspicions about these invoices. The guy that she sent that email to just so happened to be one of Fat Leonard's cronies. So he forwarded her email to Fat Leonard. And then not too long after that, the Thai Navy informed Teresa that Leonard had a copy of the email that she sent to this colleague. So she was furious, and that was a lot of what spurred her to also go to the NCIS and to push them to investigate. And surprisingly, this time they actually did. And in this NCIS investigation, they were able to get one of Leonard's employees, so somebody on the inside of Fat Leonard's company, they got her to wear a bug to a meeting, to wear a wire to a meeting where she recorded another employee admitting to inflated invoices. So this investigation, unlike the 27 other ones, was actually starting to go somewhere.
But Fat Leonard had a mole inside NCIS, John Beliveau. Leonard first met Beliveau while he served as a bodyguard to an admiral in the West Pacific. Ironically, Beliveau was awarded NCIS Agent of the Year shortly before this all went down, which is perfect. But
I love that so much. That's where you go, huh?
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Yep.
And you kind of go, okay, so this is a made for Hollywood movie.
Oh yeah. Yes, I think so. So yeah, Beliveau enjoyed the money and the prostitutes provided by Fat Leonard. And so Beliveau informed Leonard about the results of this NCIS bugging operation. But also, while he was digging around in the NCIS records on Leonard's behalf, he stumbled upon another huge problem.
Right. And here's what happened with the other problem. And that's that there's a ship commander's wife. Her name is Marcy Mishevich. It's this weird, I'm sure it's a Czechoslovakian name. It's like Coach Krzyzewski. It's impronounceable. But I think it's Mishevitz. So Marcy Mishevich, Mishevitz.
Nailed it.
Mishevitz. Good. So she contacted the NCIS about Leonard. So this commander's wife contacted NCIS about Leonard because her husband, Michael Mishevitz, accepted trips and prostitutes from Leonard. Not a great way to have your wife really be in your corner. And on top of that, so listen, not only did Fat Leonard give this guy, Michael Mishevich, trips and prostitutes, after that, he also gave Michael Mishevich a Gucci purse to give to his wife, plus tickets to the Lion King in Tokyo as kind of like, I don't know, like, hey, honey, I'm a good guy kind of gifts, or like, hey, you might be suspicious. It's to smooth things over, like a gentleman.
You bet.
But the last, but obviously Marcy had known there was other infidelity that had been known to Marcy before this, and their marriage was not good. All this other stuff starts happening. He's hanging out with these shady people. And the last straw for Marcy Mishevich was when her husband, Commander Michael Mishevich, took their kids along with him to a meal with Fat Leonard and some of Fat Leonard's cronies. That pissed her off, beyond pissed off. And so because of that, just, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. So she found everything she could that was incriminating to her husband, and she dropped it off on the desk of somebody in the NCIS. And this included communications that her husband had with Leonard, and it also included communications that her husband had with this former mistress. Are you ready for another fun Navy fact, Caleb?
I am thoroughly enjoying the fun Navy facts.
Adultery is a court-martialable offense in the U.S. military. Did you know that?
I absolutely did not know that.
Now you do. And it's not, and this is like, I researched this on some Department of Defense website. Says the maximum punishment for adultery / extramarital sexual conduct is a dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement for up to 1 year. You could go to jail for a year and lose your pension for having adultery in the Navy. But it turns out NCIS was way more interested in the Leonard stuff than they were in the philandering stuff. So the mole, John Beliveau, told Leonard about the Misovich situation, because that's what John Beliveau found when he was digging around, was like, oh shit, not only did they bug one of your employees, there's also this commander's wife who gave over a lot of incriminating shit to the NCIS on you. So the mole, John Beliveau, told Leonard about that, and John Beliveau, who works for this basically intelligence agency within the Navy, he was like coaching Leonard, and he says, hey man, this is some bad stuff. And so Leonard, don't, under absolutely no circumstances should you contact Commander Misovich, because that's a bad move and it's going to just go against you. So because of that, Leonard promptly contacted Commander Misovich and he didn't just contact him. He like emailed him going, hey, I heard that your wife is turning over some stuff to the NCIS. And then this is where the story gets so fun, because Commander Misovich's email was currently being surveilled by the NCIS. So they saw the email from Leonard,
of course,
telling Misovich about the stuff that Mrs. Misovich gave the NCIS, and they go, he can't. And so the NCIS was like Leonard has an informant inside the NCIS.
Yeah.
So NCIS goes to their cybersecurity team, and they're like, hey, you got to figure out what the hell's going on here. And the NCIS cybersecurity team tracked everything back to John Beliveau. But they didn't confront John Beliveau yet. Instead, what they did is they planted fake info into their server that said, hey, this Fat Leonard investigation, we're closing it down. Nothing to see here. It's just going to bed, like it had 27 times before. So Beliveau saw the fake info. He believed the fake info. He told Leonard that, hey, it's been dropped. We're off the hook. That was a close call. But we're good. And so Leonard obviously relaxed his guard, and he took a trip to San Diego, California, United States of America, to pitch some new contracts to the Navy. But when he got to San Diego, California, United States of America, he got apprehended.
So Fat Leonard apprehended in 2013, and he made a plea deal in 2015, and he started snitching on everybody. Okay. Prosecutors claim that Leonard's corruption scheme cost the Navy $35 million, but it's got to be more than that, right?
It's got to be way more than that. My again, this is sort of a gut feeling. This wasn't a spreadsheet calculation that I made, but
right.
My gut saying it was like 10 times that. But
yeah.
But again, we've talked about this in so many cases. I bet you that's just that the Navy can prove $35 million.
Right.
So yeah.
So Fat Leonard figures, well, I'm going down. Why not take some high-ranking naval officers with me?
Yeah. Drag some people with me.
Why not? More than 24 naval officers have pleaded guilty in this case to taking bribes and defrauding the U.S. Navy. Rear Admiral Robert Guillot was sentenced to 18 months in prison, making him the first ever Navy admiral incarcerated for a federal crime. That's something.
That's a big something, yeah.
7 other admirals have also been disciplined or censured by the Navy.
Which is also a big damn deal.
Seems like a big deal.
Yeah, that's and that's the thing. Like if it said generals, you might swallow your gum, but an admiral is basically the equivalent of a general just in the Navy. So that's insane.
Yeah. Fat Leonard spent 4 years so during this time he's doing time. He spends 4 years in prison, but then he's released on house arrest because he's diagnosed with kidney cancer. And so he does all this cooperating with prosecutors, and he's finally going to be sentenced in September of 2022, September 22nd of 2022. And on September 4th, 2022, he cut off his ankle bracelet and disappeared.
Exactly. It was crazy. He El Chapo'd his way out of his, he didn't dig like tunnels or anything, but
what if he did?
Well, they didn't find it.
Oh, they
didn't
talked
about
tunnels.
that.
Okay, they would have talked about it.
Yeah, they totally would have. But still, the guy just bounced out of house arrest, 18 days before it was go time.
Yep. And Leonard was then recaptured on his sentencing date, September 22nd, 2022, at an airport in Venezuela. Apparently, he had fled from San Diego to Mexico, from Mexico to Cuba, and from Cuba to Venezuela.
A real Carmen Sandiego kind of situation going on.
Very much so. Very much so. He was about to board a flight to Russia where the compromising information that he had, right, and either other top secret info would probably be very valuable to the Russian intelligence. And he's, as of this recording, he's currently being detained in Venezuela. But extradition's on hold because, Venezuela and the U.S. kind of a strained relationship. So, Greg, did we learn anything? This is a corruption scandal. Very little debits and credits going on here.
Right.
But not everyone who listens to this show is an accountant. But corruption, pretty fun fraud corruption.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
so what did we learn? That's what I'm asking.
Right. And I'm excited to get to a corruption case, especially one that's legit. This is arguably my new favorite fraud case that we've covered. And I don't want to discount the fact that it is a corruption scheme, because even if you look at the ACFE, when they're talking about talking about fraud, they break it down into three general categories, which is financial statement fraud. We've tackled those. Yep. Asset misappropriation, which is basically embezzlement. We've tackled a lot of those. Yep. And they also list corruption. So this is definitely in the wheelhouse of fraud examiners. It should be in the wheelhouse of accountants as well, because this stuff does go on in U.S. companies, and we need to be aware of it.
There's paper trails, right?
Yeah.
Like if there's a paper trail, then it can be accounted for. That's what I'm saying, right?
Right. Well, and here's where I feel like a corruption case is basically just a supercharged fake invoice scheme. At least Leonard's corruption scheme was that, because in a fake invoice scheme, you send in either an inflated invoice or just a completely false invoice. Yep. And you just are sitting there crossing your fingers and holding your breath that they're just going to pay it and not ask any questions, which happens a lot, which is actually, if you want to dig back deep, that was kind of what we were talking about with the printer toner pirate king.
That's
episode, our very first episode.
Yep.
Yeah, because they were sending these inflated invoices, and just hoping that people wouldn't look into it. So that's but here the difference with a corruption scheme, and this is why it's supercharged, is that you're not crossing your fingers hoping that nobody finds out about it. You know that they know that it's inflated, and you just are going, yeah, I gave you some bribes, so this is gonna go through. And So that's one of the things that I feel like I learned, was just how corruption could really just be seen as like a tweak of a pretty normal fraud scheme anyways. But I think this is a more important thing that I learned was the weird relationship that's born out of bribery. Because if you look at what happened in the Fat Leonard scam, obviously Fat Leonard's in deep shit for bribing the Navy, but the people accepting the bribes are in equally deep shit, or at least close to equally deep. There's a lot of everybody's in trouble, both sides. And so there's this weird bond that then is born between these people where it's like, if I snitch on you, I'm snitching on me. So yeah, these invoices are good. And that's how, so it wasn't even that Leonard had to like put a lot of pressure on these people that he had relationships with. It was just that everybody knew that everybody had dirt on everybody. So let's just pay the invoices and call it good, because and especially when it gets as personal as this stuff was getting, where it's like, not only do I know that I paid you a lot of money, I know that I saw you at the orgy that I was at, having sex with someone who was not. Your wife was not at this orgy. Yeah. I checked IDs and your wife was not there. So you're not just financially busted, you're personally decimated if this goes south. So there's this weird. I mean, so you almost have like a lot of confidence that your essentially false invoice scheme is going to succeed. Yeah, it's wild, man. And then the third thing, and this is a little bit in the minutia of Fat Leonard's house arrest, but I found that part, and this was my understanding of how the house arrest worked, was that, like we said, Leonard was incarcerated after, he was incarcerated while they were waiting for him to be convicted. He was incarcerated after his plea deal while he was still supposedly cooperating and helping helping bust all these other people who were involved in the whole thing. But when he was released to house arrest because of his health conditions, what the court did is they ordered Fat Leonard to pay for his own security. He had to pay for the guards who were there to make sure that Leonard stayed inside his house. Yep. Which I get that, because the U.S. taxpayers probably don't want to pay for guards when this guy had, like we were saying, maybe has 10 times the amount of money that they can prove that he stole from the Navy. So it's like, you got plenty of money. We know you got plenty of money. You can pay for these guards. But of course, that because the day that he escaped, the guards didn't stop him from escaping. And Caleb, there's even talk that there was some like U-Haul vans there the day before he escaped. And it's like, where the hell were these guards? They were gone because Leonard was fucking paying. He was writing them their checks for that. So he's probably like, hey guys, I'm paying this whole thing. It's cool. Thursday off. You guys, you get Thursday off, everybody, buddies. And the guy's he's a wheeler dealer and a schmoozer. He was probably all of his guards' best friend while he was there. And so here's what I was thinking as I go, that's so analogous to the stuff that we bitch about like every single podcast about companies hiring their own auditors. And it's the same thing. If you've got a shitty company that's wanting to get away with stuff they're hiring the person that's supposed to narc them out, they can definitely leverage that relationship to make sure that they come off clean in the end.
Do you want to know if I learned
What about
anything?
you, Caleb? Yes. Did you? What were the things that you learned, Caleb?
I think this is just what it underscores, what this story underscores for me, at least, like if you bring it back to how it's relevant for, the accountants listening out there, or just anyone listening. Because again, we have a broad audience, Greg, but and you touched on, I think you touched on this a little bit, so hopefully I'm not repeating you too much, but the fine line between bribing and the ordinary course of business. Yeah. Right? Yeah. So like if you're an auditor and you've got a client and you'd like to take that client out to dinner because you're just you're conducting this in the ordinary course of business because this is occasionally what happens between people. Yeah. Or say it's a prospect. Forget about being a client. Say you're an auditor and you're wooing a client. And you're like, oh, in the ordinary course of business, I would like to buy this person a cup of coffee or take them to a fancy dinner or like bring them to a ball game or whatever. It's like, that's okay. I mean, I know there's rules around this stuff and like, but it's also a very like, where does the line get crossed? Like when does the SEC say, that's a bribe or that impairs independence or that's what we consider to be illegal behavior, or where you're just like, hey, people just going to a ball game and join client and service provider or prospect and potential service provider. These are just people acting in an ordinary course of business. There's nothing untoward here. It's just like the situations can look very, very similar. And except for one tiny detail, and then it tips over into corruption versus not being corruption.
Right. A very interesting quote from Fat Leonard is because again, his whole goal at the time when the interviews that the different organizations had with him, it was while he was in house arrest. So his whole mission in life is to drag people down with him. So he in this conversation, he says, $1,000 a plate meal? That's absolutely a bribe. I was 100% giving you a bribe. And he says, this wasn't some meal from McDonald's for $10. This was $1,000 a plate Michelin meal. And I think that speaks to what you're saying, because I think everybody would go, yeah, if he'd taken him to McDonald's, that's not a bribe. And yeah, $1,000 a plate meal, 100% a bribe. But what you're saying is there's a big gap between those, and where's the tipping point between them? And it's like, don't know. Because the bank that I bank with, they keep offering me Utah Jazz tickets during the season to go and watch the Jazz, and I don't accept them, not on principle, more because I'm not a sports guy. But now I feel smug that I'm like, I resisted their bribes and their corruption.
That's right. I don't know. Maybe you should just go to watch a basketball game sometime and and go and just be like, and report back and be like, I felt very corrupted. I feel like, yeah, I'm going to give these bankers everything. I'm going to give them all my business.
We should just, we could do a live episode, and the whole time is me just going, I don't think I'm supposed to be here. Are they paying for these hot dogs? The prices of these hot dogs is clearly inflated.
This is a $12 hot dog.
If this was a $1.50 Costco hot dog, that'd be fine. But this is $15? Ridiculous.
And they threw in the nachos.
All right, so that's it for this episode. Remember, if your spouse is cheating on you, just have them enlist in the Navy and get their ass thrown in jail.
That's good advice. And also remember, new episodes of NCIS air every Monday night on CBS.
Yeah, I've never watched the show, but I hope that every episode includes a mole in the NCIS and a bad guy nicknamed Fat Somebody. If you want to drop us a line, send us an email at ohmyfraud@earmarkcpe.com. Caleb, where can people find you out there in internet land?
On Twitter at @CNewquist and LinkedIn, my full name, /Caleb Newquist. Greg, how can people get a hold of you?
People can get a hold of me at my OnlyFans page, at Greg Kyte, where I'm basically just doing basic bookkeeping and wearing no bottoms, but you can only see the webcam that shows my top half, but let your imagination do the work.
Seems worthwhile. Oh My Fraud is written by Greg Kyte and myself. Our producer is Zach Frank. If you like the show, leave us a review. Did you hear the review at the beginning of this show? Greg Kyte could read your review. Wouldn't that be thrilling?
So thrilling.
Also, share the show with people you love or your worst enemy, whoever. It helps, this is how people find podcasts. That's what I'm trying to say. Also, subscribe on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you listen. And for the accountants out there, listen on Earmark. Get some CPE. Nothing corrupt about that at all.
Nope.
Join us next time for more avarice, swindlers, and scams from stories that will make you say, oh my fraud.
Oh my fraud.